In this two-parter episode of the Career Kickstart show, we've been on a journey with Meg Cale, who is the founder of Dopes on the Road and is an internationally known and recognized travel expert for the queer community. Now, this career story she's been taking on has been very personal. It's been very candid. We've had a lot of twists and turns. Meg has talked about how she started off as a queer activist, and we went through her journey of going through some trauma, dealing with friends lost to hate crimes, and we also reached the point where Meg realized that she had to get outside of this bubble that she was living in New York City and kind of explore the world and see what life was like for everybody else who wasn't a New York City queer activist. In the last episode, we ended with her going to South Korea to begin, the travel chapter of her career. So I hope you enjoy this next part. I know I did. For people who are listening, I feel like we can detect a chapter turning in the story. We've been listening about the young origins of Meg. Now we're getting into the travel log and the wanderlust portion of our journey. So you got a job there. You weren't a digital nomad? Because I've never been quite sure if you're like a cousin to their kind or exactly what. I guess we're going to find out, but you got a job and you stayed there, or you traveled around Asia?
So I actually got a job and I stayed there. I was teaching English, like most people who end up in South Korea. And I had actually two jobs while I was there. So one, I was working in what's called a hagwon. It's basically a private English school. So South Korea is like real intense with education. And our kids were 3 years old to 7 years old. So I was working in the school. And then I also did business English classes. I was hired by a company to basically do kind of like an assessment of their English language skills, essentially. And then I also did like private lessons teaching adults English. And I worked with a lot of academics and like higher level folks teaching words specific to policy and activism, essentially, like conversations around those. Like, how do you have a conversation about government or foreign policy? So it wasn't really like, your basic English class. Like one of them, everything was designed around The Economist. So I kind of just sat around like bullshitting with a bunch of guys about stuff that was in The Economist, teaching them English words associating with it. It was an awesome job. So at that time, I was in Korea, which Korea still has like a complicated world with LGBT issues. And I went from literally like Grand Marshal of the Pride Parade for the Trevor Project in New York City to being in the closet in Korea. And there's no employment protection, like LGBT people obviously they exist everywhere in the world, but there's no visibility. I was there during one of their first pride parades that they had in Seoul, which is like a ginormous city. And I was terrified like the entire time because I was like, and I've written about this, but I think things in my head, like if somebody finds out that I'm gay, I'm going to lose my job. And like my employer had provided my apartment and my cell phone. And I would always think like, I need to make sure I have enough money just in case like somebody finds out I'm gay so that I can leave the country in the middle of the night, because I was so freaked out about what the consequences would be in a place that wasn't welcoming and affirming. And now I know like this is extra as fuck, but it was a real feeling at the time. And it was very much dictating my choices. So I needed like an outlet of like, where can I like be gay? And obviously the internet was that outlet, but Korea does not have freedom of speech. So at the time they blocked a lot of LGBT websites, LGBT affirming resources. So I started using VPN, and then I realized if they can't read LGBT content, then my coworkers would never be able to find my website. So
oh, clever girl.
Yeah. So I started a blog, and mostly it was just like, dear friends back home, I did not die today.
Like it's a Civil War letter. Dearest Caroline.
I wrote it in 1852. Yeah, no, that's it. And then like the first posts were like so embarrassing. Like even just thinking about it now makes me like cringe. But I wrote about just like what my experiences were. But at the same time, like I'm an American. So like I was getting like people messaging me being like, did you hear about this thing happening in North Korea? And like I would hear about it from like 10 Americans before like anything would ever be talked about in Korea. Spoiler, nothing ever happened. I was fine. fine. It's not dangerous. Korea's great. Go visit.
Hashtag go Korea.
Yeah, it's probably visit Korea. Hey, tourism board, reach out to me. So I was living there and I was working there and I was traveling a lot, and I met this Canadian girl who was awesome and like a pillar in my life. Shout out to Julia. And she and I just kind of became besties, and she wasn't queer. ...
Oh my gosh.
I know. So I had to like learn, I kind of had to talk to people without like drag race jokes and stuff. It was weird. And this sounds crazy. And I'm sure like for the straight people listening to this, you're like, the hell is she talking about? But there's so many like cultural things of being in the LGBT community that when you're so siloed into the LGBT community, you don't realize that it's like weird to talk about bondage at work. Like, you know, like,
yes.
Yeah, well, you know, it wasn't for me. And I realized like, oh shit, I work in a kindergarten. Like I have to like tone this stuff down and learn how to communicate with people who are different than me. Not even just like on a gay versus straight level, but also the difference between being like an outspoken, dominant queer woman in New York City versus being a kindergarten teacher in South Korea might as well be like different planets. And so I was really forced to do that. So I was working during the day in school, and then I was running my blog, and I started getting emails from people. And I, you know, we'd travel and stuff on the weekends and around Korea. And then like when we had school breaks and stuff, we'd travel all over Southeast Asia. And I started just writing blog posts about like what my travel experience were. 'Cause, you know, people would ask me all the time, like, is it safe to travel to blah, blah, blah. And my background in activism made me kind of uniquely qualified to be able to answer some of those questions. And my experience being, you know, very visibly in relationships that were very visibly gay. And in those places, I was able to kind of speak to things that a lot of the content at the time, and still to this day, just doesn't answer. Like, there was no travel content for queer women, really. I mean, you'd find like gay boy stuff, but it was one of two things. It was either like rich old gay men or like guys in Speedos, like gyrating on the beach. And that's still kind of true to queer travel now, but it was even more exaggerated back then. And, you know, people just messaged me and like asked me. And so I started writing these like crazy long, like narrative Facebook messages and emails and stuff to people. And then I was like, well, I'll just turn this into blog content. And so I didn't know anything about SEO. I didn't know anything about that. And I started getting so much traffic. And I remember the first day being like, holy crap, 100,000 people have read what I wrote. 100,000? That seems like so many. And now comparatively, it's like freaking ridiculous. But at the time, that was a lot for me. And I just remember thinking visually, what does 100,000 people look like? You know? And I was like, well, shit, maybe I should like learn to write.
So you kind of learned all these skills really ad hoc. It's not like you took a course or anything like that. You were pretty much just learning in the Wild West days of the internet as, well, frankly, everybody else was.
Right. Well, when I started, Instagram didn't exist. Twitter was like brand new. Facebook. I mean, I got my first Facebook profile in 2005. I remember the day Facebook came to our campus, and we started using these tools in our personal life, but I was also using them to advertise LGBT events, and I was doing drag shows and marketing before there was a word for internet marketing, you know? And of course, it was applicable to the stuff that I did in my work in activism because we used social networking as a tool to spread the word. But I never really thought about it in context of personal branding. I remember sitting in graduate school and our professors being like, don't post your real life on the internet because your employers are going to see it. And I remember sitting there being like, so why don't you just stack the deck in your favor? Makes sense, right? You know, if all the potential job people are going to be looking at my internet presence, why wouldn't I just be like, everything I do is dedicated to my work? So I kind of jumped on that early and it stuck. And then like I already had a following before I started my blog because people knew me from the world of nightlife and the world of activism and kind of just being a smartass on the internet.
So you're kind of semi-pro at being a bon vivant of New York City and everything like that. Now you're getting a little bit more global, but it sounds like this is a lot of you traveling around with your friends, you know, I guess the dopes on the road. How did it start getting intentional and you realized, oh, I don't need to teach English? Like I can use this as a jumping off point for a business, for a platform to do your own brand of activism. How did that happen? What was the tipping point?
Gay Star News reached out to me with Austin Matta, who, if you're listening, thank you for giving me my big break. They reached out to me and they found my blog, and I was debating whether I wanted to renew my contract in Korea or whether I wanted to kind of go home and get a job in policy. And they reached out to me and were like, we love what you do. Would you be interested in going to 10 Pride festivals in Europe and writing about one? We'll pay all your expenses. You just have to commit to spending the summer in Europe going to Pride every weekend. And, we'll pay you like $400 a Pride festival. And I remember being like, what? You're going to pay me to go to Pride?
That's a good deal.
Yeah. And it wasn't like a lot of money or anything like that. But I guess I realized, holy shit, like this could be a job. Kind of in the same way with activism. It was like a natural skill set that I already had. And I was like, we'll see what happens. And it snowballed from there. That was my first press trip. And this was in like the first year of blogging, which for those of you who are not travel bloggers, that is kind of unheard of. It's also kind of unheard of, like how fast I built my momentum. But to be fair, it was because I was uniquely qualified in my niche before I started blogging. Once I started blogging, I knew the right things to say. I had to learn the travel side of it, of course, but I know queer theory in and out, and I know policy in and out. And that is a lot of the questions that people are asking in regards to travel. Will I be safe here? Can I be out? What are the LGBT things to do? Where are the community activities? Who's the influencers in this space? Like those are the things that both readers and brands would ask me. So I started playing both sides of the fence. I'm a content creator, but I'm also a consultant. So I've worked at this point, I'm 6 years in. So I did that first press trip and then was all in building up content, building up my following. And anybody who tells you that they just accidentally built a following is full of shit. Like there's a lot of strategy that goes behind it. There's a lot of learning SEO. There's a lot of connecting with other bloggers, connecting with people in your audience, in your demographics, doing events, figuring out how to monetize, learning business skills, and on and on and on and on. So I spent a lot of time and effort and just really worked my ass off. People ask me all the time, like, how do I become a blogger? And I'm like, well, you've got to commit to at least a year of 16-hour days, learning everything that you need to know, because you don't have to recreate the wheel anymore. Like when I started, there was nothing. There weren't even like tutorials on how to set up WordPress and stuff. Now you have like everybody handing you like on a silver platter, like, how do you do this? What is the recipe for success? And even today, if you want to do this, you have to commit your time to learning the hard skills of designing a website, inbound content marketing, SEO, social media, all of that. Like people think, oh, you just drink cocktails and take selfies on the beach. Well, okay, that's definitely a job perk. We can write off that cocktail, but it's a lot more than that. I went from kind of just being like, well, maybe I'll make this a job, to being like that passionate person where I was in activism, where I didn't do anything but think about blogging and think about social media and think about travel and think about queer identity as it intersects with new media and travel and what I could do. And it blew up from there. And now I've had like a lot of big name partnerships. I've been interviewed by the United Nations World Tourism Organization as an expert in LGBT travel for 2 consecutive UN reports. I've been featured in big publications like New York Times and, BuzzFeed, if you're into that. And I've done a lot of work on the consulting side of it now. So yeah, of course, I still create content. I still write blog posts. I'm still on Instagram. Follow me. But also I'm a brand ambassador now for Kontiki International. So I'm their international ambassador for LGBT travel. And I work with them on a content level, but I also do trainings, teaching them what's the best way to support LGBT people while they're traveling. And sometimes with a brand like Kontiki, for example, they're a global brand. So you're bringing together folks who are coming from wide varieties of backgrounds and personal context in relationship to what they know about the LGBT community. So being able to do some trainings for them on like, what do you do if you have like an LGBT couple staying at your hotel or on your tour, or, what happens if there's a conflict between 2 of your guests? Or a lot of the time in terms of like hotels, we talk about, okay, if you have a couple that you think might be LGBT checking in, what's the best way to approach them in regards to that? Sometimes people would be like, oh, well, it's 2 men, so 2 beds. Whereas it's a little bit deeper than that, or, not necessarily saying like, oh, there's an anniversary on the notes. So Mr. and Mrs., things like that we go through in trainings with folks, and also doing trainings on how to do a marketing campaign. I hate it. Every single lesbian centric travel campaign, it's either one of 2. It's like 2 moms with a child, but they're not touching. Like no intimacy. Or it's like the exact opposite and it's like a naked femme. You know what I mean? Like, so I do a lot of conversations around marketing and working with the LGBT community or catering to the LGBT community, providing them services, as well as basically continuously traveling. I traveled like 42 weeks out of the year last year, which is way different than being a digital nomad because I'm in a destination for like a week and then I'm moving on and I'm there to meet with a brand or meet with a tourism board, or sometimes it's just like experiencing the area so I can write about it. But, you know, digital nomads tend to stay in one spot. But at the same time, like I am an expat, like I've lived abroad. You know, I was like one of those people after Trump got elected that I actually left.
You made good on your word, but then again, I guess so did I. And that's what I liked about you, because throughout this story, you have been very tenacious. You have very much a velvet tenacity that I very much appreciate in a person. But what I think is interesting, because we're kind of getting to like present day Meg. So we've gotten through the career story, and I feel like what a career story it is. But one thing that I know that I've had to deal with when you have that balance between the entrepreneurship, the media, the advocacy, the activism, is that feeling of, is this where my efforts should be, especially when you go from something that's very serious to like something that's more focused on leisure. Like the trainings that you've done do have ripple effects, where I do believe once people know more gay folks, they know more queer people, they become more comfortable. Once they understand, that understanding does bring compassion and acceptance and everything like that. So you've done a lot of really good, like, I guess, soft power work through your trainings and your brands and kind of shaping this media. But like, how does it feel when you talk to people from back in the day? Because I know that I still have friends who are activists who are still doing frontline sort of work at some of these nonprofits. Do you ever feel like a disconnect or like, oh, is this what I should be focusing on? Is there ever an internal struggle between, like, I guess when you think of queer activism, a lot of it can be really performative on social media. Do you feel like how you're doing activism, which I feel like is very powerful in a way, it comes to people as a friend, as opposed to a lecturer, a call in as opposed to a call out, which is really common now. Do you ever feel like, oh, is this what I should be doing with my platform? Was there ever a struggle, or have you always been like, you know what, I'm tenacious Meg and I'm going places and I got my weave in and my dress on and here I am, world? Was there ever a struggle?
Well, there was, but it's a little bit different than what you're probably thinking. I really struggled with not always posting my opinion, which seems counterintuitive to a blogger. But, you know, I work with a lot of brands and I have to like think about the bigger picture. And for me, I think as a person of influence, it's not always about what I think. And sometimes it's about the broader image. So sure, like I can post my personal opinions all day long about Trump and about political policies and how unfair this is and how unfair that is. And let me tell you, I've got some opinions. But I don't know that that is the best use of my platform towards actually helping people. And I think when you create a brand that's basically just like bitching about stuff all day long, that people start to tune you out. And that used to be me. You know, if you go back far enough on my social channels, like you'll see me talking about activism and talking about politics and talking about, I had less to talk about because Obama was president, but you know, it's another story. So I think the biggest lesson that I learned when I went from activism to Korea was how much I had siloed myself and how I didn't understand what the world thought of LGBT people. I didn't understand how the world was. I thought like everybody was like me, you know, like everybody is super into policy and everybody has had these like experiences in the queer world and everybody's had this trauma, but no, they haven't. And I think most people, I like to believe that people are genuinely good and they have like good intentions and that maybe they just haven't been exposed to certain things. And so I think that for me, the transition was less about like, okay, let's do trainings for public schools and more about like, how can I make the quality of life for queer people better? And so I have done a lot of activist-y kind of content. Like I do a whole series about why I think it's important to travel to anti-LGBT countries or places, why I'm against travel bans when I don't think they're effective. But two, LGBT people exist in every place in the world. Whether you see them or not is a different conversation. So I have gone to places like Egypt where it's illegal to be gay, and I've written about it, written about how you can travel safely. This year, I am coming full circle and I'm going to sub-Saharan Africa for the first time. And I'm going to be writing about what it's like to be queer in sub-Saharan Africa. And I am planning a trip, hopefully, fingers crossed, to Iran this year, to again, what the experiences of queer women in Iran are like. And now, I'm a travel blogger, so I kind of straddle the world between marketing, sales, and story creation or content creation. Sometimes, I have to do things that feed my soul. Like I did a blog post I met this woman in Salvador, Brazil, and she is a queer activist and kind of a freedom fighter and just complete badass. And she's a street artist, and she does a lot of political activism in the form of art in Brazil, which has the highest rate of anti-LGBT hate crimes and the highest rate of femicide, which is violence against women in the world. And, I met with her and I got some recommendations, and I did this whole blog post. It's like a social justice oriented things to do in Salvador, Brazil. Let me tell you about how nobody has read that because, that's not what people are going on vacation for. I mean, maybe me, but obviously some people have read it, but it didn't do as well as like, say, a post on like Dinah Shore. I go to Dinah Shore every single year and people always want to talk about Dinah Shore, which is amazing. You should buy a travel package for me. But it's totally not the same type of experience as, doing things like visiting Iran. You know what I mean? Like there's no debating that. And so I try to do a balance of like feed my soul content, feed my soul travel, and understanding that I'm no longer my audience. I've been to 50 countries, like I've traveled and places and parts of the world that most people have never even heard of, so like, I know that someone has to start somewhere. And so I'm cool with doing content that's like, go on a cruise, do this luxury experience, like all of that. And if that's what your soul needs at that moment, if you are that person working at the Trevor Project who just needs a break, and you just need to take time to yourself and self-care, you know what? You do that. And if you're that person who wants to backpack through Southeast Asia and, wants to read a blog post about how to save $2 to travel for 14 hours when you could have taken a flight, like those kind of people, they want to have their adventure and they want to rough it and they want to do it their way and do it yourself. And that's just as valid. It took me a long time to get to the place where I felt that way, but I see both sides of it. So as an activist, I think, yeah, I can do that content about Brazil and I can do that content about Africa and I can tell these stories, but I think it's equally as important to provide opportunities for people who do want that lighter experience and do need to just travel for the means of taking care of themselves. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I don't really struggle with it because I find ways to like feed my soul. I also wrote a book about digital activism, about using digital media to create change. It's called Slacktivist. And it's about using these skills that I have to do something that's a little bit beyond the meme and a little bit more intentional. So I found ways to feed my activism spirit, but who doesn't love a luxury spa? So
exactly. And the thing is, when you're going through your story, one thing that struck me is how within the media, also, you kind of running parallel to that, is how that balance between we're telling more queer stories. We told some in the past, but they're all sad. Mm-hmm. You kind of need to let all the young queer bees know that it doesn't need to be all doom and gloom. And even if you're just pinning stuff to your inspo board on Pinterest to get you through to the next election, then you know what? God bless you. Have a good time.
I get a lot of shit about Instagram because like Instagram is not my biggest platform, but it's my favorite platform. And I think a lot of it is because it is kind of guilty pleasure-ish, it like takes you out of your own reality in some ways. And a lot of people are like, oh, right, but it creates a fake narrative and it's like, not real life and blah, blah, blah. And it's, just a perfect image. But sometimes I think we need that. And a lot of people, if you're in a place where you're not really vibing what's going on and you're like 9 to 5, sometimes you just need to have that like escapist thing. And I think that is just as worthy as the hard hitting stuff. Like I know whenever anything that's like super serious happens, like the Pulse shooting is a great example for me. Like I could not function for probably 2 weeks after the Pulse shooting. For those of you who don't know, it was the LGBT nightclub in Florida that was shot up. It was one of the largest, I think it is the largest anti-LGBT hate crime that's happened in the US and one of the largest mass shootings. But because of the amount of time that I spent in gay bars and like queer clubs, and there's a drag show going on, I was a promoter. This is my world. These are my people. And no, I didn't know anybody personally who was actually there. But for a couple of weeks afterwards, I couldn't look at the internet. I couldn't function. I couldn't focus. I couldn't do anything. And sometimes you gotta have that escapist stuff, like what's Kylie Jenner doing on Instagram today when you just cannot take another article that's deep and heavy and activist loaded and blah, 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 blah. And you know what? That's fine. I'm going to say, you know what? You do your guilty pleasure stuff. You take some time for yourself. You do not have to be on all the time, whether you are an activist or not. You got to do you.
Here, here. I firmly agree. And I feel like we've come to a good place, Meg, because we've gone through, your origin story. We've gotten some interesting nuance into what has built you. We learned a little bit about your future plans, possibly going to Iran, going to Africa, Dinah Shore, everybody. But before we go, I want to make sure that everybody who's listening can get more Meg in their life if they want. So let me know where people can find you, like if you have anything cool going on. Give us the deets on where we can keep up with you.
Sure. So my blog, dopesontheroad.com, you can always get, hard travel advice and tips. A lot of that stuff is, what to do, where to go, where to sleep, where to eat, that kind of thing on the blog. For more of that shiny, polished, idealistic version of travel, go to Instagram, and that's at Meg Cale with a C. So MEGCALE. And then on Facebook, of course, you can reach out to me under Meg Cale and become my friend. I post a lot of lighthearted, funny, LGBT-loaded social commentary and stuff like that. So I kind of do a little bit different on each platform, depending on who my audience is there. But if you want to hang out in person, I'm totally down to that. I do group trips. So I do a lot of But one of the craziest things is there's not very many opportunities for particularly LGBT women to kind of come together. And I think it's really important to preserve our community through in-person connections. And a time when a lot of lesbian bars are closing down and a lot of LGBT-owned businesses are shuttering their doors, it's a consequence of acceptance. The more acceptance we get, the less siloing we need. But we do need to have community. And I mentioned Dinah Shore, for those who are not in the know, that is the world's largest lesbian event, or queer women event rather. It's a music festival in the desert in Palm Springs. And so every year I take a group of folks to come, and usually it's single people or maybe couples who maybe, you don't know any other gay people and you just want to be around gay people. Or maybe you want to go, but you don't really have a friend who has the money to go. So you come with a ready-made group of friends where everybody's ready to vibe and get to know each other. And so I do that. And it's 2 days of touring around in the desert, doing some stuff in the Coachella Valley and seeing some art installations. We go to East Jesus and Joshua Tree and Salvation Mountain, and then we go to Dinah Shore. So it's like you already know these people because you've been traveling with them for a couple of days and seen some stuff. And we go to Dinah, and it's a music festival, but it's also a pool party. So that's one of the group tours I do. And I have some other group tours coming up this year. I'm going to be taking a group to Thailand in fall of this year. So that'll be good. And, you can follow along on social media for updates for that, or, join my mailing list, all that good stuff. I'm terrible at this. I'm just if you want to follow me and you think I'm cool and you think we vibe, then cool, follow me. If not, then I'm cool with that too. Worst blogger ever.
No, you're doing good. I was sold. I liked it. And also what I was thinking when you were talking about the Dinah Shore trip is that I'm from Tucson. And if you're anybody who's from a smaller city like that, this could be a great trip for those who are like, wow, I've dated everybody in my city that I want to date. I need to import somebody. This is a great place to go and maybe bring back a girlfriend. So just heads up.
Well, and not to be Dinah's biggest hype girl ever, but there is something really special and kind of magical about looking around at a small city and being like, wow, everyone here is like me. And that is something that we're kind of losing as a community. And one of the reasons I think, Dinah has a bit of a reputation as being spring break for lesbians. And there's for sure some of that, if you're into that you can find it. But it's also a lot more than that. We take over the whole city, and it's all of your people for, just a few days in the desert. It's a small city in the desert becomes Queerville, USA. And I think there's something special and something that we still need from a community perspective, but also from a travel perspective and from, an activist perspective. So even if you don't go with me, maybe give Dinah a chance. It's a little bit of a rite of passage for folks in our community.
It sure is. And I've never gone.
Hello, should I send you my link now?
I guess you need to. My goodness. I'm sold. Meg, I'm speaking for everybody. This has been a very amazing career journey of ups, some downs, some twisty ways of one woman making it in this big world. So thank you so much for being on my show and sharing your story and just being so candid and real as you do so.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
This is great. For everybody who stuck with us on the journey, thank you for listening. And as always, I'm Sami Gardner, and this is the Career Kickstart Show. Bye. Change your career, change your life at CareerKickstartAcademy.com.